Wife wants an open marriage. I firmly opposed it. Unexpectedly, in a fit of anger, she directly brought her lover in front of me and asked if I wanted to join them. Just when she thought I would be furious and divorce her, I surprisingly chuckled. I said, "Wife, I thought you were testing me. You should have told me earlier." I waved my hand and said, "You too. Come and meet the big madam." Chapter 1. At the company's annual meeting, Willow was standing close to manager Makoto. The two of them were being affectionate, whispering something to each other, and Willow giggled charmingly. While laughing, she playfully punched Makoto's shoulder and said, "Makoto, you're so annoying." I stood in the corner holding a cocktail, staring at them absent-mindedly. Perhaps sensing my gaze, Willow restrained her smile, adjusted her black skirt, and entwined her arm with Makoto's. Makoto walked with Willow to stand in front of me. He smirked slightly and said, "Sorry, George. I took up so much of Willow's time. Now, I'm returning her to you." As he spoke, he patted Willow's shoulder, pushing her in front of me, and raised an eyebrow, saying, "George, Makoto and I have been discussing company matters. You aren't angry, are you?" Willow snorted and replied, "Of course not. He's so generous." In front of me, Willow hugged Makoto's arm confidently, tilted her head towards me, and said, "It's raining outside. Makoto will send me home in a while. You can go back by yourself." In March, the weather in the southern city is always unpredictable. Neon lights outside the window were tangled in the drizzling rain, creating countless scattered halos that made people irritable. I took my gaze away from the window and focused on Willow's hand. Her fingers were long and fair, with delicate skin, entwined around Makoto's arm, giving the impression of holding a beautiful jade. Such hands, such a face. No wonder I fell for her back then, trying every possible way to have this woman. I chased Willow for 9 years. From 16 to 25, she spanned my entire youth. At my most infatuated with her, upon hearing one word from Willow, I would take a 10-hour flight from abroad to be with her. With flowers in my left hand and breakfast in my right, I knocked on Willow's apartment door. At the moment the door opened, I greeted her. "Willow, good morning." She widened her eyes in surprise and said, "Huh, why are you here?" Willow was dressed in a white lace pleated skirt paired with a short light blue knitted sweater, making her look especially innocent. However, she was holding a small suitcase, her dark hair casually tied up, with a few strands messily falling on her cheeks, as if she was about to go on a trip. Chapter 2. I stuffed the flowers into her arms and asked, "Didn't you ask me to come?" The night before, Willow had called me 3 times for 3 hours. She was probably drunk, her voice hazy, playfully cooing like a child. "George, I wish you were here with me. I miss you so much. Come back and be with me." Okay, we've known each other for so long, and this was the first time Willow had ever said she missed me. Through the phone line, my heartbeat was deafening. After hanging up, I was overjoyed. I couldn't wait to pack my bags and buy the next flight home. On the plane, I didn't sleep for a single second. When I closed my eyes, all I saw was Willow's bright and captivating face. She was in a bad mood. She said she missed me. She said she needed me. Was she finally ready to accept me? When we met, what was I going to say? I was tangled in worry and confusion, frowning one moment and smiling foolishly the next, practicing over and over in front of the mirror. "Willow, I'm back. I'm never leaving again. I'll always be with you. Okay." All the lines I imagined remained unspoken. Willow tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and laughed softly, saying, "I was just kidding. Why are you coming back at this time?" She casually placed the flowers on the shoe rack by the door and said, I've made plans with friends to go on a road trip to the northwest. It's getting late. I have to go." Willow walked around me toward the elevator. I stood there dumbfounded and asked, "Going on a road trip? Didn't you say you were in a bad mood?" She nodded and replied, "I'm in a bad mood, so I need to get some fresh air." With a ding, the elevator doors opened, and 2 of Willow's girlfriends walked out, holding hands. One said, "Willow, the car is downstairs. I'm going to your place to use the bathroom first." The other added, "Huh, George, why are you here too? Are you coming with us?" Alicia frowned and nudged Willow with her elbow, giving her a look that said, "Didn't we agree? There will be several handsome guys there." Willow shook her head, turned around, and opened the door, saying, "George isn't coming with us." As they walked into the living room, I heard Alicia whisper, "He flew back overnight just for you. That's not very good, is it?" Willow pouted and said, "Did I ask him to come back?" Another of Willow's friends laughed and tried to smooth things over, saying, "It's okay. George won't be angry. After all these years, Willow can call him anytime. Make him go whenever she wants." What could he say? Willow nodded lightly and said, "Yeah, don't worry about him coming over early in the morning without saying a word. He's crazy." Crazy. Her voice was light and the word was disdainful. It felt like an icy spike had pierced me, chilling me from head to toe. Laughter echoed in the room. I clenched the breakfast bag in my hand and forced a smile. All the anticipation along the way had been in vain. With just one sentence from Willow, I had been busy and anxious, but in her eyes, from beginning to end, I was nothing more than a doormat. I threw the entire bag of breakfast into the trash can, blocked and deleted all of Willow's contact information, then quickly bought a flight ticket and left the southern city. I felt that the name Willow should have already been concluded in the script of my life. In the following time, I followed the routine, listened to the elders' arrangements, and stayed abroad for work. But unexpectedly, a month later, Willow appeared before me again. She didn't say any unnecessary words. Instead, she directly asked if I still liked her, and even went further to ask if I was willing to marry her. She said she thought she was a scorned woman, that she had been very sad over the past month. She said she never realized how important I was to her before. Rationality told me to investigate thoroughly, but that was Willow. She was my entire passionate youth. So, I proposed to her the night before the wedding. She went out with her girlfriends to clubs and bars for a girls' single party, and didn't come back all night because she knew that the next day she only needed to act a little cute towards me. For so many years, no matter how extreme her actions were, as long as she looked at me pitifully and acted cute, no matter how much anger I felt inside, it could instantly melt away. She took advantage of my love for her, brazen and pushing the boundaries. A few days ago, she even asked me for an open marriage. The reason was that I found a photo Makoto had sent her in her phone. It was a picture of a pair of colorful handcuffs. Makoto wrote, "How about trying this next time?" Chapter 3. I shoved my phone screen in front of Willow and asked her what this meant. She first lost her temper and snapped, "Are you crazy? How dare you rummage through someone else's phone? Don't you have any trust between spouses?" Seeing me stare at her coldly, she looked aggrieved and said, "Don't get me wrong. Makoto must have sent it to the wrong person." I scoffed. Willow suddenly stood up and arrogantly said, "Fine. If you insist on thinking that way, there's nothing I can do. I don't even bother telling you." As she spoke, she reached out to snatch the phone from me. Unexpectedly, she accidentally pressed the call button, and the other side was answered immediately. Makoto's indulgent voice gave me goosebumps. "Baby, I've prepared a lot of other props besides this. Are you excited?" Willow looked embarrassed and hurriedly hung up the call. The two of them locked eyes for a moment in silence before Willow threw the phone aside, putting on a carefree expression. "Makoto is my boyfriend," she declared. Hearing her say that so bluntly, I was stunned. "Don't you care at all about basic morals and ethics?" It seemed that by revealing the truth, she felt more at ease. She countered, "What are morals and ethics? What defines right and wrong?" I replied, "It's simple. The standard of good and evil is if you wouldn't want others to do what you're doing, then it's evil. I don't steal from others because I wouldn't want anyone to steal from me. I don't hurt others because I wouldn't want anyone to hurt me. That's good and evil." She laughed derisively. "That's easy to argue against. So does that mean if I don't care about others stealing my things, stealing isn't evil? Let me put it this way, George, you can go find yourself a girlfriend, and we can each play our own games. I don't see anything wrong with that." Willow said she was never a virtuous woman. She was a modern woman who wouldn't become a chaste martyr for me. She even claimed that love and sex are fundamentally separate and that an open marriage would benefit our relationship. She said, "Love is an emotion. Sex is a feeling. Emotions need to be cultivated over time, but feelings are sparked instantly. It's like how we each have our favorite dishes, but if I cook them for you every day, wouldn't you get tired of them? Wouldn't you sometimes want to try other, more exotic and exciting dishes to spice things up? So, you occasionally cook someone else's dishes, and I'll occasionally let others cook mine. Our lives will be very romantic and full of variety." I gritted my teeth and said, "So you only seek pleasure without considering good and evil?" She disdainfully replied, "It's a modern society. Why are you still clinging to such outdated thoughts? The most basic logic of living is to pursue happiness and avoid suffering. In other words, pursuing happiness is the greatest good, and going against your true nature and suppressing your instincts to avoid suffering is the greatest evil." I countered, "If pursuing happiness is the greatest good, then destroying others' happiness and causing them pain is the greatest evil. Does that make sense to you?" She rolled her eyes and said, "If you think good and evil are so absolute and objective, then were the men in ancient times with their multiple wives and concubines all immoral evildoers? Now it's women's turn, and you don't like it." Skipping over a series of philosophical arguments, finally, Willow said, "George, think it through yourself. I'm doing this for your own good. Others are lucky to have such a reasonable wife like me, and you, on the other hand, are always picky and hard to satisfy. Willow and I had too many financial entanglements for a simple divorce. Our families had business ties, and dividing the assets wasn't something that could be done quickly. Willow knew this, so she never brought up divorce. Instead, she repeatedly emphasized the benefits of an open marriage. I consistently refused. She began to test and manipulate me repeatedly. First, she would call Makoto and send messages right in front of me. During the company's annual meeting, she openly brought someone to me. Makoto didn't know that Willow and I had already had an open and honest conversation. He thought he had kept it a secret well. He concealed himself and said, "Willow, You took the joke too far. Whether I'm being generous or not, George, Willow and I are innocent. Please don't overthink it. In front of all our colleagues, Makoto tried to save face by making a few jokes, bypassing Willow and chatting with some co-workers. Willow kept her gaze fixed on his departing figure. She asked me, "Have you thought about what I told you?" I frowned, too tired to argue with her anymore. Willow sighed and said, "George, can't you just stop being so stubborn?" I waved my wine glass, ignoring her words, and asked, "You two have been drinking. How are you going to get back later?" Willow shifted her gaze to the wine glass in my hand and suddenly realized, "Oh right, I almost forgot." She reached out, took the glass, and casually placed it on the windowsill. "You haven't had any drinks tonight, have you? Then you drive us back later." I doubted my ears and replied in disbelief. "What did you say?" Willow stepped forward, pressing close to me. She slightly lifted her eyes, her gaze dreamy, and looked at me intently. I said, "You're going to drive me and Makoto to his place later." I should have been angry, but I felt nothing. I reached out and stepped back, separating myself from Willow. Lowering my head, I stared at her and replied, "All right, but I've had some drinks too. I'll have my friend come and take you both." Willow was stunned. The neon lights outside reflected in her eyes, turning into scattered, star-like glimmers. She looked delighted and asked, "You agreed?" I replied, "Yeah." I nodded indifferently. Willow looked relieved and said, "You're truly my dear and wonderful husband. Wait for me a moment. Let Makoto and you go downstairs first. He's a bit drunk. Take care of him." Chapter 4. Willow and Makoto reached the elevator entrance, and she suddenly seemed to remember something. She took a scarf out of her bag and handed it to Makoto. With a gentle and tender voice, she said, "Makoto, it's been so cold lately. This is a scarf I knitted for you myself. Would you like to wear it?" Makoto hurriedly shook his head, looking embarrassed, and said, "Willow, that's not appropriate. I think it's better to give it to George." Willow glanced at me and disdainfully replied, "He's tough and rugged, used to the wind and sun every day. He won't catch a cold, so don't worry about him." Makoto quickly interjected on my behalf, "Willow, George has been working so hard for so many years. Please don't speak ill of him." Once the elevator doors closed, Makoto's previously respectful expression changed instantly. He smoothed the scarf, gently rubbed it with his thumb, and suddenly burst into laughter, saying, "George, you're such a poor guy. See, Willow treats me much better than she does you. You didn't know, did you?" "Actually, the two of us," I interrupted with a stern face. "I know. You and Willow's affair. Willow has already told me everything." Makoto widened his eyes in shock and asked, You know all of it. Then why?" Pausing for a moment, he continued half smugly, half contemptuously, "I get it. You can't bear to divorce her, so you're turning a blind eye." Makoto smirked at the corner of his mouth, mocking me. He said that if he were me, with a wife openly having an affair, he would have divorced and left long ago. He counted on his fingers, listing out Willow and his past together. The day I was sick, Willow said she had a stomachache and couldn't visit me, but in reality, she was watching a movie with Makoto. On my birthday, Willow said she had to work overtime, but she was actually racing cars with Makoto. At the Lu Corporation, Willow secretly helped Makoto climb the corporate ladder step by step. That's why Makoto could become the general manager, and Willow willingly became his little secretary. Every day in the office, they flirted and bantered. Makoto said, "Don't let it be seen as just a wealthy miss from the Lu family. Willow doesn't dare to go against me at all. In fact, only if I allow it can Willow come home to see me." Makoto laughed. "You can only pick up the leftovers from me." He was proud and full of expectation, waiting to see me break down. I just gave him a casual glance and asked, "Have you finished talking?" He frowned and replied, "Yes." I said, "What do you mean by leftovers? Please stop it. I've been varying my meals for so many years, and you're getting proud just sipping the soup." He looked resentful and angrily said, "George, what are you pretending about?" "George, you're so good at pretending. If you really didn't care about Willow, why didn't you divorce her? You're just jealous that your wife left you for me, so you stubbornly refuse to give up." Makoto's words grew increasingly harsh, but fortunately, the elevator stopped at the first floor just in time, and the busy crowd poured in. Makoto immediately shut his mouth, put on a humble expression, adjusted his scarf, and walked out of the hotel entrance. After Willow descended, Makoto returned to his previous indulgent expression, reached out to embrace her shoulder, and said, "Willow, if you're really going back home with me, leaving George here alone." Willow adjusted his scarf again and asked, "Then what should we do?" Makoto grinned mischievously and said, "Why not let him come with us?" Willow poked Makoto's arm hard and complained, "If you keep being this bad, I really won't tolerate you anymore." But in her eyes, there was a hint of expectation as she glanced at me. Makoto chuckled softly, tightened his hold around her waist, and said, "All right, just the two of us tonight." A light drizzle was falling on the street, and the hotel lobby was nearly empty. The two of them were shamelessly flirting and bantering, completely ignoring me, until the bright headlights pierced through the rain. An extended Rolls-Royce stopped at the hotel entrance, and the door opened. Upon seeing who stepped out of the car, Willow's expression changed instantly, and she exclaimed in surprise, "Carolina." Carolina was the cousin of Willow's good friend Alicia. Although she was 5 years younger than us, Willow never dared to act arrogantly in front of her, because Carolina was part of the Lynn family. Carolina's father was the richest man in the southern city. My family, Willow's, and Alicia's were all quite well off, but Carolina was a step ahead, not in the same circle, and we usually didn't hang out together. Willow obviously didn't think that Carolina was the friend I had mentioned. She enthusiastically approached to hug Carolina and asked her why she was coming to the hotel at this hour. Carolina ignored her and instead glared at me with a bit of emotion, angrily complaining, "It's so cold today. Aren't you afraid of catching a cold?" As she spoke, she took a scarf out of her bag, one she had prepared earlier, and hurriedly wrapped it around my neck, urging me, "Hurry up and get in the car." I obediently tied the scarf, tightened my collar, shrugged my shoulders, and said, "Later. You let the driver take Makoto and the others home first." She nodded. "Yeah, let's get in the car first." Chapter 5. This was an extended RV. The 2 rows of seats faced each other, with a small table in the middle holding a bottle of red wine and 2 crystal-clear highball glasses. Carolina and I sat on one side, while Makoto and Willow sat on the other. Their eyes met, and Willow still seemed a bit stunned. She asked incredulously, "Wait a minute, when did you two become so close?" She paused and then asked again, "George, is the friend you mentioned Carolina?" Carolina, however, seemed not to have heard her and continued to pull on my arm, playfully chiding, "Your hands are so cold." She pouted in a slight grievance. "I forgot my gloves." Nodding, she added, "Looks like I'll have to warm up manually." With that, she clasped my hands together and began to rub them, then leaned her small head towards me and pressed her face against mine. She said, "Your face is so cold too. Why come to the banquet in such chilly weather? Wouldn't it be better to stay home?" Willow was almost dumbfounded, her pupils dilating suddenly. She leaned forward slightly, looking bewildered and stammered, "Why you?" She seemed utterly shocked, unable to finish her sentence. It was Makoto who first reacted, questioning me sharply. "George, you're a married man. This isn't right, is it?" Carolina frowned and asked, "What's wrong with that?" Makoto pointed at me and said, "Miss Lou is still here. Being so intimate in front of her while secretly doing whatever you do behind her back, it's completely immoral." Willow gritted her teeth, almost spitting out each word as she exclaimed, "George, give me an explanation." At the banquet, I barely ate anything. The warm air conditioning in the car quickly intensified the effects of the earlier drinks. In a haze of drunkenness, the next second, I wrapped my arm around Carolina's shoulders. I asked, "Explain what?" With her hands tightly gripping mine, her delicate palms, soft wrists, and slender fingers radiated warmth towards me. I sighed contentedly, returned her embrace, and held Carolina even tighter. I said, "Carolina is my girlfriend." Giving her a knowing look, I continued, "By the way, Willow is the official wife. You should call her big sister." Carolina pursed her lips and replied, "Not going to happen." Willow looked as if struck by lightning, her eyes fixed tightly on our entwined hands, her expression full of resentment. She trembled as she said, "Girlfriend, when did this happen?" I frowned. "Isn't this what you called an open marriage? Why are you asking so many questions?" At that moment, the car stopped, and the driver's voice came through the partition. "Miss Carolina, we've arrived at apartment C." I nodded. "All right, just get out of the car quickly. I have a headache and don't want to talk anymore." Fueled by anger, Willow leaned over to grab my arm. In a somewhat hysterical tone, she shouted, "When did you get a girlfriend? Explain it to me clearly." Makoto quickly grabbed her hand to comfort her, saying, "Willow, stop bothering him. Let's go. Such a playboy. He never takes you seriously. Realize it early and escape this hell by divorcing him." Makoto got out of the car first, then forcefully pulled Willow along. Willow had already stood up and leaned towards me. With a yank from Makoto, she stumbled out of the car. She fell back onto the ground, and as Makoto panicked to help her up, Willow stood up abruptly, her face flushed, and slapped him hard. She yelled, "Makoto, who do you think you are to lay a hand on me? Get away." Turning back, she shouted at me, "George, get down here." However, Carolina immediately closed the car door, and the driver stomped on the accelerator, speeding away. Through the car window, I saw Willow chasing after the car in her high heels, cursing as she hurled her phone and purse at the vehicle. Nothing was hit, and in her pursuit, she slipped and fell forward onto the ground. Carolina nudged me again and twisted my head around, glaring angrily at me. "Don't look at her, look at me." I laughed. "What's with the jealousy?" Carolina snorted coldly. "Just jealous. When are you two getting divorced?" not wanting to hear her nagging. I leaned in and kissed her directly. Carolina's breath was sweet, her lips soft and enticing. Moving from soft whispers to rapid breaths, the air was filled with a sense of desire. She straddled me, and I tightened my hold around her waist. The warm breath I exhaled made the car window gradually fog up. Just as we were about to take things further, the phone on the seat below kept vibrating desperately. I was speechless and could only reach through the seat gap to grab my phone. Without looking, I answered the call. George. Willow's trembling voice came through the receiver. She said, "You need to come home immediately." Carolina buried her head in my neck, kissing me while one hand followed her arm down to my wrist. Then she smashed the phone aside, pouting. "I don't want to hear her voice," I replied. "Understood. I'm turning off my phone right away." Chapter 6. I didn't go home all night, nor did I turn on my phone. It wasn't until the next morning, after Carolina left, that I lazily opened my phone. Willow had sent a bunch of messages, which I didn't read and simply deleted with one tap. Although Willow and I were married, we still worked separately at our own companies. Just like before marriage, however, our families had deep business ties. Recently, we had even jointly invested in acquiring a small company to go public through a reverse takeover. Now, I didn't want to be with Willow anymore. The financial disentanglements between our families would take time, and there were countless issues to sort out. I stayed at the company for several days in a row without going home. Eventually, Willow couldn't hold back her frustration and stormed into my office. Furious, I looked up from the messy pile of documents, glanced at her indifferently, and asked, "What do you want?" Willow struggled to contain her anger, her voice cold as she demanded, "Why didn't you answer my calls?" I replied, "I'm busy." "What do you want?" Willow looked terrible, her hair was messy, her eyes red, and she looked exhausted. She rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand, walked up to me, leaned against the desk, and asked, "I'm asking you, what's going on between you and Carolina?" I scoffed and said slowly, "What's going on between you and Makoto? What's going on between Carolina and me is exactly what you and I discussed, open marriage, remember? Willow, can't you handle it?" Willow stared straight at me, her eyes half curious, half angry. She bit her lip and said, "Yes, I suggested it, but your relationship with Carolina must have been more than just a month, right?" I retorted. "What about you and Makoto? How long have you two been together?" I didn't even bother giving her a meaningful look and continued sorting through the documents. "We're all adults. I'm busy and don't have time to argue about this stuff with you. If you can't handle it, just get a divorce. What's the big deal?" Willow paused for a moment, then suddenly laughed lightly. "All right, George, after all these years, don't I understand you?" Her long, fair fingers reached out and pressed against the back of my hand as I flipped through the documents. "George, are you playing hard to get, deliberately making me angry, just like 3 years ago when you blocked me?" Willow looked very sure of herself, a hint of disdain in her eyes. Seeing her like this, I was momentarily stunned. 3 years ago. At that time, I was clearly despondent, completely wanting to say goodbye to her. How did she think I was playing a hard-to-get game? So when she came to me then, was it out of anger and unwillingness to lose the game? No wonder after we got married, Willow often joked with her girlfriends about my high skill at relationships. I didn't quite understand what she meant. Once, when I had a stomachache and called out for Willow to get me some water, she was busy watching a show or videos, pretending not to hear me. I forced myself out of bed, went to the cabinet to get medicine, and poured myself some water. Willow glanced at me coldly and said, "You can still move. What are you pretending? Moving around is good for your health." Holding the cup of water, seeing her indifferent expression, a surge of anger rose in me. I gritted my teeth and said, "Willow, why did you marry me if you hate me so much?" Willow was on a voice call with her girlfriends while watching TV. Probably thinking my words were harsh, she mumbled softly, "Do you think I was happy to marry you? It's just that I fell for your tricks." On the other end of the phone, her girlfriends giggled and said, "Brother-in-law is such a smooth talker. His skills are top-notch. He easily fooled Willow." Yeah, fooling young girls with all those tricks. A man's words are as deceptive as a ghost. Willow nonchalantly replied, "Don't laugh. You'll have your day eventually." At that time, I was too focused on my stomach pain to delve deeper into her words. In hindsight, Willow was never truly willing in this marriage. This relationship wasn't something she cherished after losing me or a belated realization of love. It was more like she was unaccustomed to the disappearance of a clingy, sycophantic husband. So after getting married, there was no need for her to pretend anymore. Seeing me silent, Willow thought her words had struck a chord. She sighed deeply, looking pleased, but recalling the unpleasant events of the past few days, she seemed unhappy. She said, "George, stop doing this. I don't like you like this. Stop looking at those messy documents. Let's go home and have dinner together tonight." Willow took the documents out of my hands. I flipped through some papers and noticed an important contract was left at home. "Forget it. Let's go home first." Willow called our aunt ahead of time, asking her to prepare meals and even listed a bunch of my favorite dishes, trying to appease me. On the way home, no matter what Willow said, I didn't argue. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the seat to rest. However, she seemed to lose her mind and started nagging again. Open marriage is originally a good thing, but with someone like you acting out, it's unnecessary. I feel embarrassed for you, George. You should try to interact with other women. Don't go for someone like Carolina. Carolina is so cunning, you can't control her. Or, should I introduce someone for you? I replied. No, thanks. After I refused, Willow was even happier and hummed a tune happily as we got out of the car. Our aunt had already prepared a table full of dishes, with a big bouquet of flowers on the table. Willow held my arm proudly and said, "Today is our wedding anniversary. We should celebrate properly." After we sat down, she continued nagging while eating. George, marriage requires effort. Look at you. You don't understand romance or ambience. So what can we do? We need to find ways to inject new energy into our marriage. That's why I found someone else. But you, in your world, you only have me. How can that work? I sighed and ladled a bowl of soup for myself, responding, "I have Carolina, not just you." Willow shook her head and laughed, still being stubborn. I even asked Alicia, "And Carolina owes you a favor." Chapter 7. One snowy night a year ago, Willow called me, asking me to pick her up from a bar. I glanced down at my phone. It was 1 in the morning. The house was warm and cozy, while outside, the cold winds were fierce, and heavy snowflakes were falling like feathers. I told Willow to take a taxi herself. However, she insisted, saying that the roads were slippery due to the snow, and even after paying extra a few times, no driver would accept her ride request. She pleaded, "George, hurry and come get me." With no other choice, I braved the storm and drove out to find her. But when I reached the bar, I couldn't get through to Willow. Her calls kept going unanswered. I parked the car and, braving the biting cold, walked around to the alley behind the bar. There, I saw a young couple passionately kissing. The man, breathing heavily, said, "Miss Lou, my apartment isn't far from here. Come to my place." The woman, also panting, replied, "No way. I already asked my husband to pick me up. You go back first." Later, the woman leaned in and whispered a few words into his ear. The man laughed softly and asked, "Really, you little flirt? I'll end up dying at your hands sooner or later." The two of them embraced tightly. The umbrella in my hand fell to the ground, and snowflakes fluttered down, quickly forming a thin layer of frost above my head. The freezing cold pierced my heart, making me feel utterly miserable. It was on that snowy night that I met Carolina. Her car had broken down and stalled midway. Roadside assistance hadn't arrived, so I drove her home. The next day, she treated me to a meal as a thank you gesture. Through these exchanges, we became acquainted. Willow found out about this and, being presumptuous, thought that my relationship with Carolina was nothing more than that. Her good mood was obvious on her face as she said, "I'm a modern woman. If you find another woman, it really won't affect me. In fact, I'll be happy for you. But there's no need to lie about Carolina or flirt with women like her. It'll only bring you trouble in the future." Halfway through her sentence, the phone rang. Willow glanced at her phone screen, froze for a second, and turned on the speaker. "Hello." On the other end, Makoto's hoarse voice said, "Willow, I've caught a bad cold. It hurts a lot." Makoto paused before continuing, "You haven't come to see me these past few days. Did I do something wrong?" His voice no longer carried the arrogance it once did. Instead, there was a hint of grievance. It seemed that the slap from before had made him fully recognize reality. Willow raised an eyebrow, turned to look at me, and surprisingly appeared somewhat pleased. She pouted and coquettishly said, "No, why accuse me? I'll be there shortly." After hanging up, I asked, "Didn't you just say today is our wedding anniversary? You're not going anywhere and should celebrate properly." Willow rolled her eyes and said, "Makoto needs me to take care of things. Don't be so petty." "Okay, all the things I said to you earlier were in vain. I've already confirmed with you multiple times," I reiterated. "I have Carolina, not just you." Willow shook her head and laughed, still being stubborn. "I even checked with Alicia, and Carolina owes you a favor." A few days ago, Anna angrily opened the car door, grabbed my arm, and said, "George, you haven't come to see me for several days. Have you forgotten about me?" I raised my hands in surrender. "No, I've just been really busy with work lately." Anna is a former university classmate from abroad and one of Willow's close friends. When we returned to China together, Anna, being Willow's best friend, even worked at the Lu Corporation for a while. However, after a fallout between them, Anna went back home to become the Su family's sole heiress. Unlike the Lu family, Anna is the only daughter of the Su family and is set to inherit the Su group in the future. Of course, that wasn't the reason I got involved with her. I was attracted to her because her face was the most beautiful among Willow's female friends. When they were together, Willow used to joke about sending Anna to become a trendy influencer or debut as a star, confident she would become famous. During that time, their interactions were frequent, and my relationship with Anna was also quite good. I can't pinpoint exactly when things changed. Maybe one day after drinking too much, or perhaps I simply acted on pure desire. After a friend's gathering, I drove Anna home, and everything happened naturally. Afterwards, Anna cried and begged me to take responsibility. She was very clingy, and I couldn't break free from her. Perhaps I didn't even want to. Anna directly pulled me out of the car, saying, "Dear, I made you a big meal. After we finish eating, I'll take you to meet some friends." I responded helplessly, "If you don't want to go, why not stay home?" She replied, "Why? Am I not good enough for you? Do you have to hide me like this?" I pushed her away with a frustrated expression. "I'm not divorced from Willow yet," Anna snapped. "She isn't hiding anything openly either. What are you afraid of?" Chapter 8. What you fear is bound to happen. Just as I reached the elevator entrance, I bumped into Willow and Makoto. They were holding hands, leaning closely together in an intimate embrace. Upon seeing us, Willow was taken aback. Then with a face full of resentment, she said, "George, what do you mean by this? Are you following us here?" Makoto frowned and remarked, "George, seriously, your need for control is too much. Why don't you just put a chain on Willow and keep her tied up at home?" Willow pouted and spoke slowly. "Have you been ignoring everything I've told you?" As she spoke, she pointed towards the direction of the garage and bit her lip. "You need to leave immediately." I was momentarily stunned, only later realizing that the Liu family has a property in this area. This neighborhood is one of the premier residential areas in the southern city, surrounded by shopping malls and top-tier schools. Even the smallest apartments start at 300 square meters. When we first got married, she even asked if I wanted to live here. I thought I was accustomed to living in our own villa and wasn't comfortable living here, so I had her rent out this property. Over the years, I had forgotten about it, not realizing that it wasn't rented out but instead used by Makoto to spend time with her. My face turned grim, seeing my reaction. Makoto instead looked pleased and tightly embraced Willow's shoulder, saying, "No matter how much you chase her, it's useless. Willow isn't going to leave you." Willow snuggled affectionately into his arms and replied, "Makoto is right. I'm not going to leave you." Then, turning her head impatiently, she glared at me. "George, can you be more generous? Acting like this only makes me dislike you more." Anna interjected. Anna waved her hand to catch Willow's attention. She paused and continued, "Is it possible that he's not here for you?" Willow looked puzzled. Anna. Only then did Willow notice her. She froze for a few seconds before quickly recovering. "Anna lives in this neighborhood." It was Anna who originally recommended that Willow buy a house here, so encountering her here wasn't surprising. Seeing Anna, Willow became even more determined to keep family matters private. She casually made an excuse, saying that she and Makoto just had some business to discuss, but George was being overly suspicious by following them. Finally, she shyly smiled. "Anna, sorry for making you look bad. You know, George has such a strong need for control and is overly suspicious." Anna asked, "Is that so?" With a sarcastic tone, Anna glanced at me sideways, her hands restless as she firmly pinched my arm, asking, "George, why don't you have the same need for control over me?" I was speechless. "Enough. Don't listen to her nonsense." I pressed the elevator button and calmly explained to Willow, "It's all a misunderstanding. I'm here to see Anna, not you. What you and Anna need to do it. I'm not looking for you, so don't bother me later." "Okay." Willow's eyes were fixed tightly on the hands that Anna was holding on my arm, her mind nearly shutting down. With a ding, the elevator doors opened, and I walked in holding Anna. Willow quickly followed, asking, "Wait a minute, what do you mean by this? You too?" Makoto glanced between me, Anna, and Willow, his facial expressions quite dramatic. "Willow." He paused for a moment, his expression complex. "Don't you see? Anna and Carolina are the same." Anna immediately became displeased, stomping her feet angrily, shouting, "Shut up. What is Carolina to me that she can be compared to us? A third-party opportunist. How can she even compare to the two of us? Childhood sweethearts. Our bond is unbreakable." As she spoke, she tightened her grip on my hand and coquettishly said, "George, remember what we agreed on. After divorcing Willow, you should prioritize me." Willow froze in place, her face alternating between pale and red, before taking a deep, sudden breath and stepping back, her back pressed tightly against the elevator wall. Trembling, she extended her hand and said, "You too, George. Are you playing games with Anna again? Do you think I'm a fool? I already told you. Stop this act. Stop." Willow didn't finish her sentence because Anna tiptoed forward, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me. I reciprocated by cupping her face and passionately returning the kiss. As the elevator doors opened, I half-hugged Anna and walked out, leaving Willow dumbfounded and furious behind. She followed quickly, shouting, "This is impossible. You too. How could this happen? Anna, George is my husband." Anna leaned against my shoulder, giving her a cold, disdainful look, and said, "So what?" Makoto, attempting to support, jumped in and cursed, "You two are shameless." Anna snorted coldly, "We're all just mistresses here, so what makes you so noble? Do you have the nerve to talk to me?" Makoto replied. Makoto's face flushed bright red as he clenched his teeth. "You're the real mistress. My love with Willow is true love." Anna glanced at him disdainfully. "What love are you talking about? What kind of person are you? Look at yourself, no ability, no character. You rely entirely on Willow for your food, clothing, and shelter, right? I heard you still work at the Lu Corporation. I guess that's all thanks to Willow too. Isn't it embarrassing if people find out? Unlike me, I only care about George. I can't bear to see George spend a single penny on me. I'm the real love, and you're just a phoenixman looking for a rich woman." Makoto had no words left and was left speechless. Chapter 9. Willow was burning with anger, her heart in turmoil. She exclaimed, "You two, when did you hook up? George, explain yourself." I replied impatiently, "Why are you digging into this? As the main wife, can't you be more generous? Be a smart woman. Turn a blind eye. I'm not staying home." "Right, you're pushing so hard. It's really suffocating me. Do you want to watch this family fall apart?" Anna pouted and said, "Then just split up. When are you two getting divorced?" I rubbed my temples and said, "See, they're eager for us to divorce." "Willow, for the sake of our family, just go back." I slammed the door shut. Only then did Willow realize. She desperately knocked on the door, shouting, "This is impossible. Open the door. George, open the door. Explain it to me. Open the door." I had no time to deal with her because Anna had already clung onto me. The knocking grew fainter and eventually stopped. Anna twisted her waist and gestured to me. "Focus." I was speechless. An hour later, Anna was wearing an apron, humming a song, busily chopping vegetables in the kitchen. She asked again whether I liked Carolina or her more. I was at a loss, hesitated for a moment, then decisively looked at her and said, "Of course it's you. I'm just playing around with Carolina. I'm serious with you." Anna looked satisfied and said, "Come eat. It's all your favorite dishes." After eating, I was cozied up with Anna for another hour. She glanced at her phone and said, "Almost time. Let's go. I'll take you to a place." I changed my clothes and opened the door. The corridor's motion-activated lights turned on, startling me. I said, "Why are you still here?" Willow was sitting on the floor by the door, her eyes bloodshot, expression vacant. Seeing me come out, her gaze swept over the strawberry on my neck. Her pupils dilated suddenly. I covered the strawberry on my neck with my hand. I asked, "Do you need something?" Willow spoke, her voice hoarse, like holding a knife. She whispered, "George, let's talk." I nodded. "All right. I want to talk properly too." "Anna, you go by yourself." Anna looked aggrieved, tried to object but didn't dare, only feigned generosity, saying after we found a place to talk, she'd come to find me. She said, "You promised me today to accompany me." I replied, "Understood. I won't stand you up." Willow looked gloomy and led me to South City Middle School. The school's back gate faced the river, with a night snack street lined with countless food stalls along the river. Back in middle school, I often skipped evening classes to come here to buy night snacks for Willow. Willow liked roasted sweet potatoes. I bought sweet potatoes, carefully hid them in my arms, and delivered them to Willow's dormitory building. The sweet potatoes were still warm. I liked the hustle and bustle of this street and often reminisced about those times, wholeheartedly immersed in love, fully committed. The first year after we got married, we often came here for night snacks. Willow bought 2 roasted sweet potatoes, and we walked side by side along the river embankment. The wind was cold, but the roasted sweet potatoes were as warm as ever. I held the sweet potatoes, staring blankly at the river. I couldn't figure out when liking someone and giving to them became such a shameful thing. Everyone said, "You're a simp. Simps meet bad ends." Liking someone meant losing oneself, lacking independence, everything revolving around the other person, just like a pitiful worm begging for scraps. I used to agree, but now I realized, how can I lose myself? That one-sided love for Willow was still myself. Doing things for her, seeing her happy and smiling made me truly happy, with no deceit. The initiative of love was always in my hands. I gave love, felt happiness, but I could also call it off at any time. Like now, I don't love Willow anymore. She's nothing. Can't hurt me at all. Having loved wholeheartedly, experienced it, that's enough. I turned to look at Willow and smiled resignedly. "Say it. What do you want to talk about?" Willow curled her lips, forced out a smile worse than crying, and said, "George, can you honestly tell me, with Carolina and Anna, really?" Before she could finish, I nodded without hesitation. "Yes, they are both my girlfriends." Willow replied with resistance in her eyes. "I don't believe you. Carolina is so young. How could you handle her?" I replied, "I just like the younger ones." I continued to interrupt Willow, looking at her meaningfully, and said, I just like the young ones, young and tender. The old ones are too wrinkled, like roasted sweet potatoes. With a pft, the sweet potato in Willow's hand was crushed. Willow took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and said, "Why are you saying these things?" Deliberately trying to provoke me. I shrugged. Whatever. You choose to believe it or not. Chapter 10. Willow found a trash can, threw away the sweet potatoes, and took a tissue to wipe her hands. I tightened my coat, huddling my neck as I followed closely beside her. I asked, "What exactly do you want to talk about? I don't want to stand here by the river blowing cold wind." Suddenly, Willow leaned over to try to grab my arm and asked, "Is it very cold?" I immediately pulled my hand away, took a step back, and disgustedly said, "What are you doing?" Willow was stunned, the corners of her eyes gradually turning red. Looking very hurt, she plaintively said, "Do you not want me to touch you anymore?" "George, we're married," I scoffed and replied. "Married by contract, each playing their own game. I have no obligation to play along with your love act, right?" Willow was taken aback, murmuring, "It shouldn't be like this." I pressed on. "So how should it be? You said it was for an open marriage." I accepted it. I have Carolina and Anna. Compared to them, I suddenly realized that the food at home is just average, and now I have no appetite. Willow shook her head desperately and said, "No, it's not like that. You always have only me in your heart, right? All my firsts were with you. How could you bear to treat me like this? You chased me for so many years. How could you really go and find other women?" I frowned and countered. "So, the open marriage is your game alone. You set the rules, but also draw a circle around me, making sure I'm inside. How come I can't get out? You flirt outside the circle, making me watch you suffer and agonize inside the circle. That's what you want, isn't it? Willow, you're too greedy." A street lamp cast a halo from above. I took several steps back, moving completely out of the halo, and pointed at the ground, saying, "Willow, see clearly, I've already been outside the circle long ago." Willow was frozen in place like being impaled by an ice spike, unable to move. She stared intently at the halo on the ground, her whole body trembling slightly. After a long pause, she walked forward 2 steps, stood at the center of the circle, and then reached out to me, choking up and saying, "I regret it. George, I'm sorry. I regret it. I shouldn't have done that. Now, let's both return to this circle together." "Okay, I'll cut ties with Makoto completely. I promise not to contact other men anymore. I only have you. Let's start over." "Okay," Willow cried, crying her heart out. This suddenly reminded me of the day I proposed to her with a diamond ring, and the moment she nodded to close the long journey of my pursuit with a perfect ending. I hugged her tightly, experiencing for the first time the joy of tears of happiness. Yet she coldly and aloofly said, "Look at yourself. So pathetic." Now, looking at her flowing tears and bitter pleas, I felt no pity, but rather more satisfaction. I put my hands into my coat pockets, calmly looking at her and said, "Willow, stop crying. Look at yourself. So pathetic." Willow instantly froze, her pupils slightly dilated. I could clearly read the emotions in her eyes: shock, hurt, heartache, regret, agony, self-blame, and pain. I comforted her and said, "Actually, it's no big deal. I didn't say I was going to divorce you immediately. I'll come back home after playing outside for a few days. Anna has already come to find me. Goodbye." I turned around, without hesitation, and walked forward briskly. Willow was left alone, solitary in place, her lonely figure stretched long by the street lamp. Chapter 11. The next few days, I still didn't go home. After finishing the company's tasks, I had to take turns accompanying Anna and Carolina, keeping my schedule fully packed. However, Willow acted out of character. Every day after work, she came to the office to find me, pleading desperately for me to go home. I was speechless. "All right, today both of them have something to do. I'll accompany you home." Willow's eyes instantly lit up. Once we got home, she personally cooked a full meal for me. Before I even started eating, I received a call from Carolina. She said, "George, I miss you." I looked conflicted and replied, "I'm at home." She said, "I'll have the driver come pick you up." I responded, "But," she pouted, "please." Carolina is a very proud person and wouldn't be as stubborn as Anna. This was the first time she had ever asked me for something like this, and I couldn't refuse her. I hurriedly grabbed my coat from the chair and said, "You eat by yourself. I'm not coming back tonight." Willow's smile froze at the corner of her mouth. Her eyes filled with extreme sadness. Her voice trembled. "George, today is my birthday." I was speechless. "Birthday? It's every year. What's the big deal? Stop being so capricious." I hurriedly left. Just as the car was about to drive out of the driveway, Willow suddenly rushed over and blocked the car in front of me. I impatiently rolled down the car window and asked, "What are you doing? Can't you stop being so impulsive?" Willow had tears in the corners of her eyes, Her voice choked. Are you not going back? I've done everything useless. I didn't respond to her. Instead, I changed direction and stepped on the accelerator. The car bypassed Willow and sped into the sunlight. A year later, Willow and I got divorced. During that year, Willow did many things, trying to win me back. She walked the same paths I had taken to reach her. But what did it matter? The blazing flames she poured cold water on couldn't reignite the dead ashes. Everything she did could only move her, not me. We went through the divorce process. I felt a great sense of relief. After the divorce was finalized, Willow looked up at me, begging me to have one last meal together. She asked, "Can we still be friends in the future?" I replied, "No need. Carolina and Anna are waiting for me outside, and they're so annoying." I waved at her and casually stepped down the steps. Goodbye. Willow's heart was torn. She reached out to grab my arm, but halfway, she recoiled in despair. She said, "George, this time, it's truly goodbye." Carolina and Anna took turns approaching me, questioning me about when I would give them a status. But marriage is something that, after one failed attempt and finally escaping the siege, I didn't want to enter easily again. Would a different person be better? Maybe, but I didn't want to gamble anymore. When Anna pressed me, I calmly admitted, "We met under the wrong circumstances. I don't believe in love at first sight. If after we get married, we encounter something like this." Anna hurriedly raised her hands to swear. "I promise, I am loyal to you. I'm very traditional. I will never have a second man." I pushed her hands away and said, "No, I'm afraid I might fall in love with someone else again." After all, I first got together with Carolina, but facing Anna's face, I still genuinely felt attracted to her. Anna was speechless. After a long moment, she pouted and said, "George, you really are." I replied, "Really what? I'm really happy." Carolina looked puzzled and asked, "Don't you want to settle down?" They didn't understand. My heart once belonged to Willow. Later, it briefly belonged to Anna and Carolina. Now, it belongs to George himself. It has already settled.